Don't know if I've got enough material.
And we're live. It's Tom Cassidy and Charles Cassidy. We're talking about the framework for exceptional teaching, the 9x4, and we're talking in this video about why it works so well. And it's a nice question to ask, because obviously,
is that something you've been asked a lot?
Well, it does work incredibly well. I've been using it in schools since the mid-90s, and I used it as a classroom teacher. And when I wanted my tutor group just to focus on particular characteristics, I've used this in insurance businesses. I've used this for motivating all sorts of teams of people. And the reason a framework works well is, well, the reason things work well is when they are frameworks, because they are actually systems that do all the grunt work for you. We talked about it in a minute ago, didn't we? We were talking about sort of Ben Franklin and the one thing at a time. But what I'm finding in all my work is that if you build a shell, a structure, a framework, it's very flexible. Whatever content you put in is secondary, really, and it's all about the framework. And taking action is what we want to do. If we want to get better at something, we're going to have some sort of action that we take. So do you want to talk a little bit, Charles, about the idea of it being a continuous process?
Well, before we got onto that, I was just going to mention, just going back a moment, the way I perceive this is with regards from, being in the classroom, you have a focus as the title of your lesson, which initially can seem quite limiting, but it actually is incredibly freeing. And I think this is what you mean about a framework.
Yeah.
But if you have the framework of my lesson is whatever, adding fractions, then you're actually completely liberated by how you get there. You can do whatever you like. So if a child decides to suggest a different way of approaching it, you can go anywhere with the lesson because you know exactly where you need to get to. So I have found that even though a framework sounds constricting, it actually it's reassuring, and therefore sort of enables you to follow your intuition in a sort of micro level. So I think it is worth doing from that perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's spend a bit more time on that. One of the things that I found in being really effective is that if you have a very, very tight structure, you do feel much more free to populate that structure with content spontaneously, because you can rely on the fact that your structure will bring you back.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I find that with curriculums. I find that with individual lessons. I find that in many aspects of life, even with eating. We're just talking about that today. If you've got kind of a rule for how you operate, how you divide your day, well, I'm going to have breakfast at 7, I'm going to have a snack at 11, then I'm going to have lunch, then you know that if you feel hungry at those other times, you can just sort of dismiss this because your thinking ahead of time has come up with a framework which works really well. Okay, so continuous process. What do we mean by that then? I guess you don't.
So this is the idea that no one will ever become the perfect teacher, I suppose.
Yeah.
But you're going to adopt a sort of a reflective attitude, and it's a growth mindset thing, that you are adopting the perspective that you will always get better, you always can be better, and it's not really about perfecting it, it's just about improving.
Yeah, so the good thing about this is it works whether you're a relatively new teacher or whether you've been doing this for 20 years. Teaching isn't something, we talk about this idea of a checklist. It's not about, oh yeah, now I do this, now I'm awesome. No, something that you could get better and better your whole life at. And your last year in teaching could easily be your best if you're
I had heard, had you heard of this idea that you never get better than your 5th year of teaching? Have you come across
I've not heard that.
Yeah, but I can imagine that, after the first few years, you've got your various things that sort of work, and then you think, well, I'm doing an okay job, this is fine, I'll just tick along. But that's quite soul destroying to think that you would peak so early on in your career, because that's going to be boring as hell, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll tell you on this why in my mid-20s I decided to concentrate more on jazz than football.
No, I haven't heard.
Well, I thought, I want to put my time and energy into something I can see myself getting better and better at every single year, every single month, every single week until I die, effectively. And And I couldn't see that with football. I could just see myself getting worse and worse.
I
As
can
was
see
getting
that.
as you get older, you know, you lose your physical capacity. Well, I saw Dave Brubeck playing the piano at 91. He's amazing. Now, so I'm thinking, okay, of course, right at the very end, you're going to lose your motor skills. You're not going to be able to quite play.
But largely, you could get better until the day you die.
I can. I mean, and luckily, I'm better now at jazz than I've ever been. You should hear some of the old stuff.
Oh my God, yeah. You should hear some of the new stuff. So with teaching, you're saying you could, in theory, although it's not typical, if you do adopt certain attitudes, you can continue to get better and better.
Well, if you literally cycled through this program, you know, every week and kept going and kept cycling through this every year, then how could you not get better if you were deliberately focusing on these things and improving all these small components? And I think the continuity thing relates to the idea of marginal gains, doesn't it? Right? If you can get better at self-belief and better at knowing why you're doing it and better at thinking big and taking risks and better at all these bits, then you're probably going to be pretty awesome. And if you carry on doing this every year, you'll get there. Go on.
So why do you think people don't tend to get better
in teaching
after sort of an initial bedding in period? I mean, obviously, you know, an old wise teacher has some experience that, you know, will separate him out from how he was when he was younger, but generally there is quite an early plateauing, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it's because you stop thinking about the craft. You think that you've got it. You think of it more like a checklist, and you think, oh, I can do this now. And you've probably found that you've got some things that work quite well for you. So it's almost like the mentality, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Whereas we're not talking about that. We're talking about a continuous process. Just because it isn't broken doesn't mean it can't be improved. And more than anything, you just want people to be thinking about it. We don't really want people to reach that fixed mindset. And you know what? As you said, it's soul destroying. I'd hate the idea of,
this is as good as I'm going to get.
Yeah.
Also, like, isn't it amazing to hone your craft and just get better and better at it? That, I mean, if you're going to be doing something every day, you don't want to be doing it, well, you know, good or bad, as you're doing it yesterday or last week or last year. You want to always be getting better, even just from your own personal interest. You want to be, you know, a greater craftsman, don't you?
Well, I think possibly the single greatest feeling in life is that awareness that you are getting better and developing at something. So when you start learning a new instrument or learning a new language, that feedback you get as you're starting to improve, and if you could have that joy, I don't think there's a greater joy than just that knowledge that you're just getting better and better at something.
Suppose this reminds me a bit of this framework concept of purposeful practice. Have you heard of that with regards, you know, there's this 10,000 hours idea about practicing a lot, but it's not just about practicing, it's about purposeful practice. So you have to have a focus with what you're doing. So it's better to do slightly less, you know, hours if you're really keyed into exactly what you're working on at all times. And this kind of relates to this, because you're talking about having focuses in having folklore, folk song. But so it's bringing some awareness to what you're doing, and that's going to lead to you getting better at it, and that's going to be more satisfying. You're going to get a kick out of that, and you're going to want to get better and better.
We could talk all day about this, couldn't we? Yeah. Let's crack on to say why else it's good. This is really important. When I'm doing a lot of training with schools, pretty much every time I go into a school, I talk to them about something. All they're hearing is, you know, seriously, all they're hearing is, this sounds like more work. You know, I'm talking about this stuff for data. I'm talking about that. And so I'm very conscious, because I've sat at the back of a room, you know, in my mid-20s, thinking that professional development, you know, CPD and stuff like that training is a complete and utter waste of time, because it's,
which a lot of it is.
Most of it is. So I'm very conscious that whenever I go and talk about this framework or anything in general, I've got to give to I've got to solve the problem in an individual subconscious mind of, this is more work for me. What has got to be, this hasn't just got to be better for an individual, this also has to be simpler, it has to be easier. If you can solve those two problems, because and what you're doing, you're not saying you have to plan more, you have to prepare more, you have to you just have to have this, do exactly what you're doing, but have a deliberate focus. So in the week where we are focusing, for example, on having high energy, say it's week 3, so you still planned your lesson, And in your delivery, you're just thinking, oh, this week I've just got to focus on the energy, my kind of enthusiasm, what I'm putting out there. And so there's no additional work. You should still be doing. There's nothing in this which you shouldn't already be doing, like planning, thinking about your lessons. But we're just saying, and that's what I love, being able to go to a school and say, you know what, this is not going to involve any more work for you.
That must be a great relief. So you're doing the same thing as you were before. The only thing that's changing is where your attention is, because your attention is going to be somewhere. So why not sort of marshal it into one specific thing at a time?
I like it. I like that very much. This is probably my favorite aspect of it, though.
Like the violin and the piano.
Yeah. You know, musical, boys, we like to get those analogies in, but you know, the low floor, high, you first talked to me about the low floor, high ceiling approach, I think, from a few years back. And the idea is that you've got to get it to be really easy to start, haven't you? So it can't be start intensive. And that's what the violin is. The violin is, you know, you've got to get the posture, you've got to get the grip, you've got to get the movement, the intonation. You know, it's going to be a long time before it gets to you get any feedback that this is going to work out for you. And luckily, some parents have, well, maybe, I don't know what they have, soundproof rooms probably, and they can deal with like the first year or two or three of awful screeching sounds, and then they end up with a brilliant violinist. But the piano, it's no easier to master than the violin, but it's a hell of a lot easier for the average kid, age 3 or 4, to get feedback that this is actually okay.
They can make an okay sound straight away because it's just buttons, essentially, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a bit like activation energy in chemistry. You know, having such a high hurdle at the first stage when you're going to be your most tentative is it's a bad model.
Exactly. So this is brilliant because, like, you don't have to do anything at all other than just focus on stuff.
But it's high ceiling because the scope is infinitely high. You can't ever, as we say, you're never going to become the perfect teacher. So there's always, you know, for someone who's, you know, an absolute craftsman in the classroom, there's still benefits that can be made.
I love it. The high ceiling, infinite extensibility. Okay, and finally, this is brilliant. If you're a school, you know, the amount of administration you need to monitor this, to keep on top of this, is virtually nothing. It's like,
how do schools monitor it? Like,
well, in the future, they'll be using this app that we're developing at the moment, of course, which will remind them and encourage them to stay on track. But the schools that I talk to, typically, they will have a weekly meeting either before school where they're 20 minutes to say, this is what we're going to be focusing on next week or this week. And they might take turns on who actually talks a little bit about the topic. Okay, the topic is rewarding effort, and they do a little presentation. They've prepared that. You know, it's totally customizable. You could have just one person just pinging out an email and reminding people, or you could have the wheel just stuck up on the, you know, Monday morning briefing. This week, everyone.
It's week 4, whatever.
Exactly.
We're focusing on, you know.
So it doesn't now. And the good thing about it is the end of the 9-week cycle, you can actually, how do we go? How did it work? What do we think? You know, how well did we feel that it went? And when we bring the app out, we'll have that ability to. It's in beta, open beta at the moment. But have the ability to self-assess and see how people felt they've developed in these characteristics, which will be quite nice.
Which encourages reflection, of course.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's rather a long session we did.
Yeah,
but
was that 10 minutes?
Something like that. But it's
good stuff, though. All gold.
Yeah, why it works so well is obviously going to be quite a long one, wasn't it? Okay. All right. Thanks for that, and see you in the next one.